The back row of an auditorium always tells its own story. It's where latecomers hide, where the uncommitted linger, where ghosts like me sit when we've lost the right to claim better seats. The oak pews of Harrington Hall gleamed with history and purpose, but the back row, my row, felt separate somehow, an afterthought to the grandeur that stretched before me. I arrived 20 minutes late to my daughter's graduation ceremony. Not because of traffic or some unavoidable delay, but because I'd spent those 20 minutes sitting in my rental car, rehearsing what I might say if Lena actually spoke to me afterward. 20 years as her father, and I still didn't know how to talk to her. The usher had given me a sympathetic smile when I slipped in, the kind reserved for those who didn't quite belong. I wondered if she could see it on me, the guilt, the distance, the years of absence compressed into the nervous twitch of my hands. "The Hart family is seated in the front 3 rows," she'd whispered, gesturing toward the velvet ropes that separated the honored from the ordinary. I nodded and murmured, "I'll just sit here, thanks." I didn't explain that no seat had been saved for me, that no one was waiting for Daniel Hart to complete their row. The auditorium of Whittier University was everything you'd expect from an institution that had educated America's elite for centuries. Ivy-covered walls visible through tall windows, polished wood panels that caught the late May sunlight, crystal chandeliers that reminded me of Claire's earrings on our wedding day, the ones that trembled when she laughed. Claire. Even from the back row, I could spot her. 27 years of marriage followed by 8 of divorce hadn't dimmed my ability to find her in any crowd. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with elegant silver instead of the chestnut waves I used to wind around my fingers. She sat perfectly straight in the front row, surrounded by what I assumed was her new husband's family. The Whitmans had always traveled in packs. I shifted in my seat, the program crinkling in my sweaty palm. Lena Hart, Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude. English Literature. My daughter. Our daughter. "Is this seat taken?" An elderly man with a bow tie and kind eyes pointed to the empty space beside me. I shook my head, and he eased himself down with a grateful sigh. "Grandchild graduating?" he asked. "Daughter," I replied, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. I hadn't had many occasions to say it aloud in recent years. "Wonderful day," he said, patting my arm as if we shared some profound understanding. Nothing like seeing them fly. That implied I'd been there to witness the takeoff, the wobbling first attempts, the growing confidence. I hadn't. I'd been too busy hiding in the contrived importance of boardrooms and airport lounges, telling myself I was building something worthwhile. By the time I realized what I'd sacrificed at the altar of ambition, Lena was already halfway across an ocean of her own making, no longer looking back to see if I watched from shore. The memories came without invitation, the way they always did in moments of stillness. Lena, at 6, chocolate birthday cake smeared across her cheeks, begging me to make a wish too, because Daddy's wishes are the strongest. Lena at 12, her face in profile against the car window as I drove her to Claire's new house, the silence between us like a third passenger. Lena at 16, her college essay open on the kitchen counter. I'd found it during my monthly visit, read it while she was upstairs, never telling her how her words about resilience had made me weep into my coffee. The dean had taken the podium, her voice carrying across the hall with practiced authority. Today, we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the journey that has brought these remarkable young people to this moment. The journey. What did I know of Lena's journey? I knew the milestones: honor roll, debate team captain, university acceptance. But I didn't know the paths between them. I didn't know if she still bit her nails when anxious, or if she'd finally overcome her fear of deep water. I didn't know if she still wrote poems in the margins of her notebooks, or if she'd found someone who loved her the way she deserved, wholly, attentively. The processional music swelled, and students began filing into the auditorium. I leaned forward, scanning each row for a glimpse of her. The girl 2 seats down from me was videotaping the entrance, her phone screen providing me fragmentary glimpses of the approaching graduates. And then, there. A flash of familiar profile, the slight tilt of a chin I'd once cradled in my palm when she was small enough to carry. Lena moved with a grace that reminded me of Claire, but held herself with a quiet dignity that was entirely her own. Her hair was gathered in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, her graduation cap perfectly level. Even from a distance, I could sense her composure, the careful alignment of her shoulders, the measured pace of her steps. My eyes burned with sudden, unwelcome moisture. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the class of 2025. Everyone stood. Everyone applauded. I rose a half-second too late, my muscles stiff with tension. The graduates took their places in the reserved center section, their backs to the audience as they faced the stage. I counted rows and seats, locating Lena by the slight asymmetry of her cap's tassel. 5 rows from the front, 3rd seat from the left aisle. I memorized the coordinates of my daughter's place in the world. The ceremony proceeded with the predictable rhythm of academic tradition. Speeches about futures unfurling and potentials realized. Platitudes about journeys and destinations that made me shift uncomfortably. A distinguished alumnus speaking about integrity and purpose in ways that felt like personal indictments. I found myself studying the backs of heads, wondering which parents belonged to which graduates, wondering if they could tell I was an imposter in their midst, a father in title only, present, but not present for all the years that mattered. I imagined that Claire could sense me, even with her back turned, that some maternal radar told her exactly which shadow in the back row belonged to her ex-husband. As if summoned by the thought, she turned. Just once, just briefly, her eyes sweeping the back of the auditorium until they found mine. There was no warmth in her gaze, no acknowledgement beyond the faintest narrowing of her eyes, a look that managed to convey both "I see you" and "you don't belong here" in the same breath. Then she turned back to the stage, her spine somehow straighter than before. The wound was familiar, but no less painful for its predictability. I deserved her coldness. I'd earned it one missed recital, one delayed weekend visit, one forgotten birthday at a time. The slow, steady accumulation of absences that eventually outweighed my presence in my daughter's life. Eli had warned me, my oldest friend, my writing mentor from college, the voice that had once told me I had stories worth telling. "You're choosing the wrong story, Danny," he'd said, the night I'd told him about the promotion that would require more travel, more late nights, more missed dinners. "You're becoming a minor character in your own life." I'd laughed it off then, assured him I could balance it all, promised him, and myself, that the novel in my desk drawer would be finished soon, that my family understood, that everything was temporary. Nothing is temporary. That's the lie we tell ourselves to justify the unbearable. Every choice creates a path that leads away from other possibilities. Every absence is permanent in its moment. "At this time," the dean was saying, "I have a special announcement. Our valedictorian has prepared something unique for today's ceremony." My attention snapped back to the present. Lena had been 4th in her class the last time Claire had updated me. Had she risen higher? My chest tightened with a complicated mix of pride and regret. As is tradition at Whittier, our highest achieving student is invited to share reflections with their classmates. This year, Lena Hart has chosen to share her words in the form of a letter that, with her permission, I will read aloud. Lena. My Lena, our daughter, valedictorian. I pressed my fingertips against my eyes, fighting emotions that threatened to expose me. The dean held up a sealed envelope. Miss Hart has asked that this remain unopened until this moment, that her words be shared with all of you, her fellow graduates, her professors, her family, at once." I watched as the dean carefully broke the seal, her fingers moving with ceremonial precision. In that moment, I became acutely aware of my heartbeat, of the weight of the air in my lungs, of the infinite distance between the back row and the stage. The dean unfolded what appeared to be several pages of handwritten text. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and began to read. "My time at Whittier has taught me many things," she read, "but perhaps the most valuable lesson came before I ever set foot on this campus. It came from someone who showed me that stories matter, not just the ones we read, but the ones we live." The dean's voice faded into background noise as time seemed to slow around me. Somehow, in the core of me, I knew what was coming, knew that the careful walls I'd built around my guilt were about to crumble, knew that whatever Lena had written in that letter would force me to face what I'd spent years trying to forget, that I had once been a father who mattered. I closed my eyes, waiting for the words she had never said to me directly, the words that would finally make me face the man I had become. The dean's voice settled into a rhythm as she continued reading my daughter's words. I held my breath, suspended between dread and desperate hope. Someone who showed me that stories matter, not just the ones we read, but the ones we live. My father taught me this before I understood what it meant. My father. Two simple words that landed like stones in still water. Around me, the audience listened with polite attention, unaware that each syllable from the dean's mouth was rewriting the air between us. Unaware that the man in the back row, the latecomer, the stranger, was being pulled from the shadows into an unexpected spotlight. "He never thought he was enough," the dean read, her voice carrying Lena's words to every corner of the hall. "And so, he stayed away. But he was the one who taught me how to hold a pencil like a sword." The memory surfaced instantly. Lena at 4, her tiny fingers wrapped around a yellow pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration as I guided her hand across the page. "See?" I'd told her. "When you write, you're fighting dragons and saving kingdoms. Every word is magic." I'd forgotten that moment. How had she remembered? "When I was 6, the letter continued, he braided my hair for a ballet recital. His fingers trembled the entire time, and the braid was lopsided. But he didn't give up. He tried 3 times until it was good enough, muttering about how some stories need revision. I was late to line up, but I didn't care. I was the only girl whose father had braided her hair that day." My chest tightened. Claire had been out of town for a conference. I'd watched tutorials on my phone the night before, practicing on my own hair in the bathroom mirror after Lena went to bed. I'd never told anyone about that. He read to me every night until I was 8, even when he was tired, even when he'd just come home from a business trip and his voice was hoarse from too many presentations. He did all the voices. He let me choose the endings when I didn't like the ones in the book. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. I could feel eyes beginning to move, scanning the crowd, wondering who this father was, this man who existed in such contrast to the absent figure implied between the lines. I kept my gaze fixed on the stage, on the dean whose voice had become the voice of my daughter. I broke his typewriter when I was 9. It was old, a family heirloom, and I was playing author at his desk when I shouldn't have been. The carriage came loose in my hands. I waited for him to yell, but he never did. He just said, "Sometimes our most important words come after we break something precious." I didn't understand then. I think I'm starting to now. The typewriter, my grandfather's Remington, the one he'd used to type letters home from France during the war. I remembered finding Lena frozen in horror, the broken pieces scattered across my desk. I remembered gathering her into my arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. I remembered thinking that nothing made of metal could ever be as valuable as her heart. When my parents divorced, I was 12. The words stopped then. His words, my words, the stories we shared, they all went quiet. He began to fade, like a character written out of the narrative. I used to imagine he was on a secret mission, that his absence was the plot twist before a triumphant return. But real life isn't shaped like the stories he taught me to love. Real life is messier, less satisfying in its arcs. The dean paused, taking a breath that seemed to acknowledge the weight of what she was reading. I saw her glance up, scanning the audience briefly before continuing. Did she know which face belonged to these words? Had Lena told her? For years, I was angry. I wrote him out of my story, the way I thought he had written me out of his. I excelled because proving my worth felt like the only way to matter. I chose literature because books, unlike fathers, stay exactly where you put them on the shelf. A tight, pained sound escaped me, too quiet for anyone but the elderly man beside me to hear. He glanced at me with sudden understanding in his eyes, then looked away discreetly, giving me privacy in this most public of reckonings. But the older I get, the more I realize how stories echo, how we carry the voices that shaped us, even when those voices fall silent. My father taught me that revision is possible, that what seems like an ending can become a different kind of beginning. I watched as Claire shifted in her seat, her head bowing slightly. Was she hearing these words for the first time too? Had Lena kept these thoughts from everyone until today? He never raised his voice, not when I missed curfew as a teenager and my mother called him in a panic, not when I told him during one of our rare dinners that I didn't need him to visit anymore, not when I refused to answer his calls last Christmas. His silence became louder than any anger could have been. It became the negative space that defined our relationship, all the things unsaid between us. Each sentence felt like a step deeper into a river whose current I had underestimated. I gripped the edge of my seat, anchoring myself against the tide of emotions threatening to wash me away. In the periphery of my vision, I noticed people turning, seeking the subject of these words among them. I kept my eyes forward, unseeing. What I've learned at Whittier is that literature isn't just about analyzing other people's stories, it's about finding the courage to tell our own, to name the complicated truths we carry, to recognize that characters can be both deeply flawed and worthy of compassion. Eli's voice echoed in my memory. The problem with your writing, Danny, is that you're afraid of your own characters. You don't let them be as complicated as real people. He'd been right about that, as he'd been right about so many things. I'd always created protagonists who were either heroes or failures, never the messy in-between where most of us actually live. My father taught me to love stories, then became a story himself, a narrative I told myself about absence and disappointment. But stories, like people, resist simple categories. They refuse to be only one thing. The dean turned the page, and I noticed how the audience had gone completely still. This was no longer just a valedictory address. It had become something rare and intimate, a public unveiling of private truth. I felt exposed, as if my skin had suddenly turned transparent, revealing every regret and mistake inked across my bones. He once told me that the most important part of any story is the moment when a character faces what they've been avoiding. I think that's why I'm writing this letter, not just for myself, but for him, for the man who taught me to be brave with words and then forgot his own lesson. I closed my eyes, remembering the afternoon she referenced. Lena, at 10, frustrated with a story she was writing for school. I don't know how to make the ending work, she'd complained. I'd sat beside her at the kitchen table, our shoulders touching. What's your character afraid of? I'd asked. That's usually where you'll find your ending. I don't know if he's here today, the letter continued, and my eyes snapped open. I sent an invitation to his apartment in Chicago, but he's always been hard to reach. Part of me hopes he isn't, that he'll read these words someday in private, where I won't have to watch his reaction. Part of me hopes he is, that he'll finally hear what I've never been able to say to his face. The elderly man beside me touched my arm lightly, a gesture of such unexpected gentleness that I had to swallow hard against the emotion rising in my throat. If he is here, I want him to know something. I remember everything. The way he smelled like coffee and old books. How he taught me to swim by telling me to pretend I was a mermaid, with urgent news for the king of the sea. The time he built a fort in the living room when I had the flu and slept on the floor beside me, because knights don't abandon their posts. Something broke inside me then, a dam I'd built years ago to hold back the flood of what I'd lost. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth, struggling to remain silent, as tears blurred my vision. Around me, the audience had begun to shift, heads turning more deliberately now, seeking the man whose absence and presence formed the heart of Lena's words. I remember the night he left too, how he knelt beside my bed and promised he would always be my father, no matter where he lived. How he kept that promise in the only ways he knew how. Birthday cards that arrived exactly on time, phone calls where neither of us knew what to say, tuition payments that never came with notes. Claire had turned in her seat now, scanning the rows behind her with an expression I couldn't decipher from this distance. Was it anger? Surprise? Some complex mixture of emotions as tangled as my own? What I want to say today, in front of everyone who matters to me, is that forgiveness isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you choose, again and again. And understanding isn't the same as absolution. It's something deeper, harder to reach. The dean's voice had softened, as if she too had been drawn into the intimacy of Lena's confession. The graduates sat motionless. Many turned in their seats to look at the audience behind them. I'm choosing to understand the father who taught me to love stories and then became a chapter he couldn't seem to finish. I'm choosing to recognize that his absence taught me something too, about self-reliance, about the way love persists even when it's imperfect. I felt naked now, stripped of all pretense. The careful distance I'd maintained, physical and emotional, collapsed under the weight of Lena's words. I was no longer invisible in the back row. I was being pulled forward, called out, invited into visibility by the daughter I'd failed in so many ways. Professor Reyes taught us that the most powerful stories are the ones that allow for complexity, for characters who are neither heroes nor villains, but human beings trying their imperfect best. I think that's the kind of story I'm ready to tell now. Not one of abandonment or betrayal, but one of people who lost their way and might, possibly, find it again. Professor Reyes. The name registered dimly. I'd seen it in the graduation program. Alina Reyes, Department Chair of English Literature. I wondered what she knew of me, what Lena had shared in her classes or office hours. So to my father, whether you're hearing this today or reading it someday, thank you for teaching me that stories matter. Thank you for showing me that even when they take unexpected turns, they're not necessarily over. And thank you for giving me the words to finally say what I've held inside for too long. I miss you. Not the father you thought you should be, but the one you actually were. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process the enormity of what I was hearing. Around me, faces had turned fully in my direction now. Some curious, some moved to tears themselves. The elderly man beside me placed his handkerchief in my palm without a word. To my classmates, the dean continued, her voice shifting to indicate a change in tone. This is what Whittier has given us, the tools to tell our own stories with honesty and nuance, to face the blank page of our futures with courage and curiosity, to understand that revision is always possible. The letter concluded with more traditional valedictory sentiments: gratitude to professors, memories of late-night study sessions, hopes for the future. But I barely heard them. I was still drowning in the words that had come before, in the revelation that Lena had carried memories I thought were lost, that she had been watching me even when I believed myself unseen. When the dean finished reading and the audience erupted into applause, I remained frozen. Claire was fully turned in her seat now, her eyes scanning the back rows until they found mine. The look she gave me wasn't cold anymore. It was complicated, layered with emotions I couldn't interpret from this distance. And then, as the applause began to fade, I saw Lena. She had half risen from her seat, her eyes searching the audience behind her, looking for me. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow. She had written those words knowing, hoping, I would be here to hear them. Our eyes met across the crowded auditorium. For the first time in years, my daughter looked directly at me, her gaze steady and unflinching. I saw Claire in the tilt of her chin, my mother in the curve of her cheek, and something entirely, uniquely Lena in the way she held herself, poised between past and future, between hurt and hope. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I wasn't sure what to do next, what gesture could possibly acknowledge the gift she had just given me, the chance, however undeserved, to step back into the story we shared. Around me, the ceremony continued, but between us, something had already shifted. Like a character facing what he'd been avoiding, I took my first step forward. I remained standing as the ceremony continued, the connection between Lena and me lingering like an invisible thread. The elderly man beside me whispered, "Sometimes the hardest stories are the ones most worth telling." When Lena crossed the stage to receive her diploma, I watched her shake hands with the university president, her smile contained but genuine. The dean leaned in to say something that made her laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in so long that it sent a fresh wave of emotion through me. As the ceremony ended and people dispersed across the sunlit campus, I stood apart, hands in my pockets, watching families celebrate. From my vantage point, I could see Lena moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations, while Claire remained close by her side. I noticed how Lena's eyes continued to scan the crowd, perhaps looking for me. "Mr. Hart?" I turned to find a woman in academic robes standing beside me. "I'm Alina Reyes," she said, extending her hand. "I've had the pleasure of working with Lena these past 4 years." I took her hand, momentarily speechless. "Yes, I'm her father." "It's nice to meet you, Professor Reyes. Lena mentioned you in her letter." "She's an extraordinary young woman," she said. "One of the finest students I've had the privilege to teach. Thank you for—" I wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Professor Reyes seemed to understand. "She worked on that letter for months," she said quietly. "Revised it dozens of times. It was important to her to get it right." The thought of Lena laboring over those words made my throat tighten. "Sometimes the most important conversations happen in unexpected ways," she continued, glancing over her shoulder. "I should rejoin my colleagues, but I wanted to say hello, and perhaps to suggest that letters usually invite responses." With that, she moved away, leaving me to consider her words. I was contemplating whether to approach Claire when I felt a presence beside me. "You came." Lena's voice. I turned to find her standing just an arm's length away, her graduation gown unzipped now, revealing a simple blue dress beneath. "I wouldn't have missed it," I said, the inadequacy of the response painful even as I spoke. Lena nodded, her eyes studying my face. "Your letter," I began, then faltered. I wasn't sure if you'd be here to hear it, she said, her fingers working at the tassel she still held. I thought maybe it would be easier if you weren't. Easier for you or for me? I asked. A small smile touched her lips. Both, maybe. She looked past me. Mom doesn't know I invited you. I didn't want her to be disappointed for me if you didn't come. The simple statement carried the weight of years of such disappointments. I'm sorry, I said, the words almost catching in my throat. Lena, I'm so sorry. For all of it. She met my eyes again. I know, she said simply. I noticed Claire watching us from a distance, her expression guarded but not hostile. I've tried to write to you so many times, I admitted. Hundreds of beginnings, but I could never find the right words. That's funny, Lena said, considering you're the one who taught me about words in the first place. The observation struck me with its simple truth. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost my belief in that magic, or my courage to wield it. I still have your typewriter, I told her. I had it restored. It works again. She looked surprised. I thought you'd thrown it away after I broke it. Never, I said. I could never throw away something that mattered to us both. A complicated emotion crossed her face. That's the thing about you, Dad, she said, the title catching me off guard. You kept all the physical things, but you let everything else slip away. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. I don't know how to fix that, I admitted. Lena considered me for a long moment. Maybe you don't, she said finally. Maybe some things just have to be written differently going forward. She reached into her bag and withdrew a notebook, simple and leather-bound. I got this for you, she said, holding it out. Professor Reyes says it's important for writers to have a dedicated space for their most difficult thoughts. I took the notebook, my fingers trembling slightly. I don't understand. I thought you might still have something to say, she told me, her voice steady. Not just to me, but to yourself. About the stories you abandoned, the ones you never finished. I stared at the blank pages, understanding slowly dawning. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an invitation. I don't know if I can, I said honestly. That's always been the question, hasn't it? Not whether you could, but whether you would try. Claire was approaching now, our time running short. Will you read it? I asked, holding up the journal. If I write something? Lena's smile was gentle, but not without boundaries. Eventually, she said, when we're both ready. Claire reached us, mentioning lunch plans with the Whitmans. Lena promised to join her in a moment. I should go, Lena said after Claire stepped away. Thank you for inviting me, I said. And for the letter. For seeing me, even when I wasn't there to be seen. Something softened in her expression. That's what writers do, she said. We see things others miss. You taught me that. I watched as she walked away, rejoining Claire. They moved together across the sun-dappled lawn, while I remained behind, the journal clutched in my hands. Finding a quiet spot on the auditorium steps, I opened the journal and began to write. My dearest Lena, I sat in the back row today and heard the words you never said to me directly. I watched you cross the stage with a grace I've never possessed, and I remembered how terrified I was when you were born, afraid I would fail you in some irreparable way. And then I did. The story I've been telling myself, that my absence protected you, crumbled today. I realized that in trying to spare you from my failures, I committed the greatest one. I robbed us both of the chance to know each other imperfectly, but honestly. You remembered things I thought were lost. You carried pieces of me I believed I'd taken when I left. You showed me that our stories remained connected, even when I tried to write myself out of yours. I don't know if these words will ever be enough, but you've given me blank pages and the courage to begin filling them, and that is a gift beyond measure. With all my love, Dad. I closed the journal, knowing these words were just a beginning. That real reconnection would require more than good intentions. It would demand presence, consistency, courage, all the things I'd failed to give for so long. As I walked toward my car, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Eli had been right. Your stories are only worth something if you show up to finish them. I didn't know if Lena and I would ever fully repair what had been broken, but for the first time in too long, I was willing to try, to step into our shared story instead of hovering at its edges. I looked back at the auditorium once more, then turned toward the road ahead, carrying with me the gift Lena had offered. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something perhaps more valuable. A beginning,